It's been a busy week while I was gone. Everybody seemed like they were talking, including Doug Pederson today. And I thought he spoke for what, an hour today? Doug Pederson, about an hour?
Yeah, the NFL, they break up the coaches. The AFC coaches speak one day, have a 1 hour long breakfast thing, and then the NFC coaches for today. And basically they sit at a table, and, if you're a national reporter trying to, hit it, maybe get a little bit with each coach, it gives you a chance to kind of go from guy to guy to, ask specific questions. But if you're the coach, you just sit there the whole time. And if you're an Eagles reporter, you basically want to get the Eagles coach talking the whole time. So you get a full hour, which is a very long time to be answering, sometimes redundant questions. But, I thought Doug handled it fairly well today.
Yeah, and just off the bat, I know there was a lot in there, and there's some things that stood out to me. But was there things in there for you that really were newsworthy? Because there's a couple things that I thought he said, but what I know it was a lot, but what stood out to you ultimately that really made your ears perk up?
Yeah, not a tremendous amount that was completely surprising, but it was the first time he kind of talked about some of the stuff we kind of assumed. He's talking about, for example, one of the big questions we've had about the offense is, wide receiver, for example. He, basically said that Jordan Matthews was going to get a look through the spring at playing on the outside, not playing in the slot as he did under Chip Kelly, and that solves a big problem for them because the way they were looking at it, if Matthews is a slot receiver, and you want to use your tight ends a lot as the West Coast offense typically does, then Zach Ertz is in the slot. I mean, you basically have two guys playing in kind of one spot in the offense. Probably your two best receivers on the team, at least most accomplished receivers on the team right now, in Ertz and Matthews. But if Matthews can play outside, that frees up a spot for Ertz to play inside. It fills a spot on the outside, and then whether it's Aguilar or Josh Huff or Chris Givens or somebody else, you're just going to have to fill one wide receiver spot now. So that was a kind of a big deal. The West Coast offense also uses a fullback. Eagles have not had a fullback on the roster since 2012 before Chip Kelly got here. But Pederson said, there's a draft one, which you can get them kind of late, or a guy like Trey Burton who's a backup tight end. He's got the right size for it. He can block a little bit. He can also get out and catch the ball. So Trey Burton could end up being the fullback on this team and get used in a different way than he had been. So there were some interesting little things like that. He also kind of talked about basically how the linebackers are kind of shook out. Kind of looks like Nigel Bradden would be the strong side linebacker, Michael Kendricks on the weak side, and Jordan Hicks in the middle. So that's some clarity to some things that we weren't really sure about. But generally, it was that kind of stuff that he, Sam Bradford had gained a little bit of weight, which is a good thing. They kind of felt, Bradford said this last year, last year he was basically rehabbing the knee injury, and he wasn't really able to do the kind of working out that he would do typically in an off season. So this year he's healthy going into the offseason so he can work on things like bulking up a little bit. Bradford is not, the most physically imposing guy in the world. He's kind of skinny, especially his legs are really, really narrow. So, adding a little weight and strength would help him kind of, take hits and get through the season. That's probably all a good thing. And, Pederson said he was doing a good job with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Phil, and you mentioned the receivers. I wasn't here when they signed Givens, but he's a guy that had his best couple of seasons while playing with Sam Bradford. He gives them a little bit more of a deep threat, too. I mean, even last year where he didn't, make a big contribution, he still averaged over 22 yards or 23 yards a catch. He's been kind of a big play guy, and maybe him reuniting with Bradford could be something. And as you mentioned, them taking the opportunity to at least try Matthews outside, that could set up, they might have something there finally with Matthews, and then Givens gives them at least a veteran guy that Bradford knows.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea there. I mean, you're looking at a team where, with Chip Kelly kind of, guiding things, let Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin walk out the door the last two off seasons, leading receiver each of the previous two seasons. You can only do that for so long before you run out of receivers. And the Eagles kind of hit that point this year. They released Riley Cooper, who's not really a big play, deep threat kind of a guy, but very young and very inexperienced at wide receiver. Nelson Aguilar, if he can develop into that kind of player, and we don't know that yet, he could add some of that too. But yeah, to have a guy that Chris Givens is a guy that with good speed. He kind of said, his average per catch kind of went down the last few years. And he said basically, if you don't have a quarterback that can get the ball to you, that's the problem there. I mean, you can't make it happen if you're the receiver. You can only catch what's thrown. And with Bradford, it's funny because Bradford did not throw the ball deep a lot for the Eagles last year. But when he did, it was relatively successful at it. And with a guy like Givens who he's comfortable with, kind of get that chemistry back that they had, at least gives him a little bit of something there on the offense to look forward to and see how that works. Because one thing about the West Coast offense and Pederson's offense as an extension of that is, you kind of have a focal point wide receiver. And Chip Kelly's offense was all about spreading the ball around as guys came up and in the system. It's very system-oriented. The West Coast offense, Jerry Rice was a superstar in the West Coast offense. I mean, there's always been that role for a wide receiver. You don't always have a Jerry Rice caliber guy, but the offense is built around having a guy that you focus on and get the ball to, and that you scheme to get the ball to. You try to get make sure that guy gets his catches. So he doesn't really have that receiver yet, 100%. I mean, it could be Givens, it could be Aguilar, it could be somebody else who comes along in the draft or wherever, but that element is in there in this offense. So it'll be interesting to see how that role gets filled and what Sam Bradford is able to do with it.
Phil Sheridan's with us, ESPN.com, NFL Nation, covers the Eagles. And last week, too, he talked Pederson talked about the corners, and he said we like the depth there now. They signed Nolan Carroll last week. Of course, they brought in some free agents earlier last week. So it seems like the corner spot, but that's an area where you think with the 8th spot in the draft, if there was a guy they liked, they would like to go after. But did those comments kind of take them away from drafting a guy that high?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was interesting the way he said it. They have good depth there, but they have depth, but they don't have somebody at the top. You got the depth, you got the backups, you've got a bunch of guys who can kind of compete and give you depth, and maybe somebody will emerge to be a top-ranked guy. We don't know yet, but that's possible. But I don't think that would preclude them drafting anybody. If Hargreaves or one of those guys is an elite cornerback that they think is the guy with the 8th pick, and that's the best guy on the board when they get there, I think they're really going to take pretty much any position that they believe. If they believe the player is worth the pick, any position on the field, I think that's really what they're going to do with this pick because you don't want to be drafting in the top 10 too often in the NFL. They had to trade up to get there, but they have enough holes in this team that almost any way you draft, if it's an elite player, and Tyler Roseman says he thinks there's 10 guys at that top tier in terms of talent in this draft. So if you can get one of those top 10 guys, that's a real difference maker at any position on the board. I think they would do it. So if they can get an elite cornerback who can be a star down the line for years to come, I don't think you would avoid doing that because of Nolan Carroll or Eric Rowe or anybody else on the roster right now.
Phil, what did you make of Jeff Lurie the other day? I mean, it seemed like he kind of so laissez-faire, was just like 3 years is 3 years, no big deal. Whereas here's a franchise that's just yearning for a Super Bowl, and it was almost like he was willing to write them off as if, hey, we tried 3 years, whatever, it was no big deal.
Yeah, it was odd. It was an odd thing to say, and it was an odd message to send to your fans. And I agree. I wrote a thing about that after he said it because I just felt like, the Eagles fans, it's not about the last year or the last 2 years with Chip Kelly or 3 years. It's about the last, 55 years. And, you're talking about a team that's gone 55 years without a championship. Jeff Lurie has been the owner for 21 of those years now. I mean, this is not a guy – when he got here in 94, he looked at the franchise and its history, and he was kind of like, looking down his nose a little bit. Well, look at this franchise. We're going to win championships. That was his big quote back in 1994. We're here to win championships. Well, it's been 21 years. That's 21 of the 50 Super Bowls that have been played on Jeff Lurie's watch, and the Eagles are, 0 for 1 in getting in winning them, and they haven't been to too many either. So, it's just a very odd thing to kind of say. Well, it was just an expenditure of time. Well, time is ticking on this franchise, on the city. I mean, the Eagles winning a Super Bowl. We got to cover and see the Phillies winning in 2008, and that was a really big deal. I mean, it was a really big deal for the city. It had been a long time. But for the Eagles to win a championship in this city, the way it is focused on football and the love for the Eagles and the passion for the Eagles, I mean, I'm not sure, the whole city might burn down. Not because anybody doing anything wrong. It just might spontaneously combust because of the excitement that would bring. So, to be the steward of that team, to have that kind of pressure on you to kind of be the guy that delivers that championship, I understand that you want to kind of brush it aside. But I think really the thing about the Kelly thing was that he wasn't really talking about the full 3 years. I mean, the first 2 years he won 10 games each. Everybody kind of thought he was on the right track a little bit. But Lurie basically was admitting that he threw the 2015 season away just to let Chip Kelly prove to the world that he wasn't a good head coach. It's like he really wanted to get rid of Chip. He kept Howie Roseman around for a reason, and that reason was to replace Chip as the guy running the franchise. And so it's an odd thing. It's an odd situation to put everybody in because, was Jeff Lurie rooting for the Eagles to win last year, so Chip Kelly would be vindicated and have to be the coach for the next 5 years? Or was Jeff Lurie sitting there, rooting for Chip Kelly to fall on his face so he could clear him out, move on, and have Howie Roseman run the show again? It's a very weird situation to be in, and it doesn't send a great message to the fans who paid for the tickets and the suites and the luxury seating and all that stuff, and buy the shirts and do everything that makes this whole thing possible. So an odd message to send, but the thing about Jeff is he's a pretty bright guy, but when he gets into these situations where he's got to speak off the cuff and he's not sure what the question's going to be, he sometimes gets a little bit lost in his own head in the answers that he gives sometimes. I think that might have been what happened in this case. Been covering the guy for a long time. I know him. And, when you talk to him one-on-one and it's a conversation rather than a Q&A, like a press conference type thing, he's a lot more comfortable and a lot more relaxed, and he tends to do better in terms of explaining himself. I think, he started talking about RFID, the radio frequency thing that measures player movements. He just kept talking about that, and it's like people were asking about, what's going on with the franchise, and he's talking about, the data that's coming in from this RFID system. And it was like, I'm not quite sure what made him. Maybe they just had a seminar about it that he just came from, and it's on his mind. But that's kind of what happens with Jeff when he's in these situations. He sort of gets, he sometimes sort of drifts from the main point. There's nothing to say, but ultimately, the Chip Kelly era is over, and now the question is, can they get to that Super Bowl that everybody's been looking for so long? And there's no evidence yet based on Howie Roseman and Doug Pederson. But that's what this year is about, to kind of get a sense of where this thing's going.
Yeah, and it's interesting because today, obviously, Kelly speaks, and it just talks to the dysfunction that had gone on here over the last couple of years, where it just seemed that this organization was flying by the seat of its pants.
Yeah, it really did, and it was really odd. And hearing Chip's version of it, that hearing Roseman didn't speak very much, and he didn't, they really didn't communicate at all, and but Roseman's doing these contracts that ended up being disasters, based on what Chip Kelly wants to do with personnel. I mean, that's a really, really poor way to run things, and you saw the results of how that turns out. You end up with a coach getting fired, a team kind of falling on its face, all these big signings that didn't work out, having to trade these guys away, get rid of their contracts. I mean, Roseman, to his credit, was able to kind of clean up a lot of the mess and kind of just move on from it, without too many salary cap implications down the line. And that part's fine, but it's getting into the mess. It's having this sort of dysfunctional way of handling things, the lack of communication. I mean, this whole thing is basically triggered when Roseman fires Tom Gamble. So why did he fire Tom Gamble? I mean, no one's ever answered that question. It's never been explained. Last year when we asked Lurie about it at the owners' meetings, he just kind of went, I don't want to talk about it. That's kind of old old news at this point. It's like, well, no, it's not. No one's ever explained it. He just fired the top personnel guy in the organization working with Chip Kelly, and that led to the whole thing that happened afterward. Kelly saw Roseman fire Gamble. Kelly went to Lurie and said, this is not right. I mean, I don't want to, that's not how I want to work. Lurie said, okay, well, now you're in charge, knocks Roseman aside. I mean, all that stuff happens because, Howie Roseman can't get along with Tom Gamble and fires him. So having that sense of dysfunction, it's kind of always been a part of the mix when Howie Roseman's in charge, since the Eagles have had him there. That is a real concern. I mean, I guess the hope here and what Lurie's going for is that you now have Roseman in charge and everything else is a Roseman guy. I mean, Roseman's in on Doug Pederson. Pederson's a guy that's familiar with everybody. There's nobody trying to learn this organization or figure out all these personalities. It's all in-house now. Now, that could either really work out well, which is what Lurie's gambling on, or that could be a total disaster because you don't have anybody who can, voice a dissenting opinion without, the whole thing falling apart. So it's a little bit risky, but, it's got to be better than having the dysfunction of the last couple of years.
Phil, I know I don't know that anybody's ever asked Jeffrey about this or if he's mentioned it. How long is he in this for? I mean, is this a long-term thing for him? Does he say, I got 3 more years of owning this team? I mean, it seems like, as you mentioned, he's been the guy here for 21 years, and time kind of flies here. Is this his passion? Is this what he wants to be for the long term from here on? Does he want to be the Philadelphia Eagles owner?
I think so. I mean, if it got to the point where he just, figured he could cash out, make $2 billion or something like that and walk away from it, I guess there's a possibility he would do that if somebody dazzled him with some kind of enormous offer. But the sort of, Forbes list of, valuation of these franchises, that's based on a lot of other things. Actually getting someone to pay you $2 billion for a franchise is a whole other matter. So, it's possible that he get some kind of offer that would make him want to do it. But every sign from Jeffrey the last few years is that, his son's been around a lot more. I think the way he sees this is, he would like to be a guy who becomes like the Rooney family is in Pittsburgh. A guy that's there a long time, passes it down to his family, and it becomes an institution in the city, with his family attached to it. All the sense I ever got from him is that that's what he wants to do, and that's how he's playing it. Given that there's so much money involved in these franchises now that if somebody came to Jeff Lurie and said, hey, $2.5 billion, I mean, yeah, he'd probably think about it. It'd be hard not to think about an offer for, billions of dollars. So it's unlikely, and I think his goal or his wish or his plan at least is to stay and pass it down to his son at some point, in the future. But for, at least the next decade based on age and everything else, you're looking at Jeff Lurie running this team, I would think. So I don't know what his next move would be. If this doesn't work out with Roseman and Pederson, going back to kind of, back in time to the Andy Reid era that he had the most success he's had, if he doesn't get that to work, and the Chip Kelly thing obviously didn't work, I'm not really sure what his next move would be. Maybe to clone Bill Belichick or something. I don't know.
We're talking with Phil Sheridan, ESPN.com, NFL Nation, at Sheridan Scribe. The Eagles, I guess, still plan to hire a head of personnel after the draft, right? Yesterday, did Lurie's comments kind of suggest that Roseman will be the guy, or he'll be the guy who hires the guy who works under him? Because it sure seems like he's happy with Roseman running things again.
Yeah, I think he is. And then basically the way he put it was they planned to hire somebody, and they always knew that after the draft, and this has always been the case, the contracts for GMs, personnel people, scouts, all those guys, they generally run from draft to draft. So when you sign a contract to work for a team in the personnel department, you're generally working through the next year's draft. So a lot of those contracts are up when the draft is over. So more people become available in terms of talent if you're looking for a top personnel guy. But it sounds very much from what Lurie said this week that Roseman will be in charge. This person will work for Howie, and he'll be the top guy in terms of personnel, personnel department and running it. But Roseman will still make final say on all the decisions. He'll still run the salary cap. He'll still allocate the resources. Still kind of be the guiding force behind it. He also said that he's for the last year while Chip Kelly was running the team, Roseman was going around to other organizations, including going to England to talk to English Premier League teams, talking to basketball franchises in the U.S., trying to get different ideas and expand, his knowledge base on how to run a team. So here's, Chip Kelly coaching away, trying to, get this team to win games, and the guy that he displaced in the front office is traveling around to learn how to be a better GM and learn how to run a team in new ways. It's a little bit strange set up that way as well, but if Roseman can take some things from what he learned, bring it all back, the experience he's had in the NFL, and the mistakes he's made, and learn from those, and also learn from the things he did well. All of it. Just the experience gives him a stronger foundation. Then he can be a decent. He was probably too young and inexperienced when he got the GM job the first time around, but at this point he's got the experience and the knowledge, and he's a little older and a little more ready for this job. So, it's up to him to make it work. But he is apparently the guy on top. There will be a personnel guy running the personnel department, but that is going to be a guy that reports to Howie Roseman.
All right, Phil Sheridan with a lot of Eagles stuff going on. The three head honchos speaking this week. It was Lurie, Roseman, and Pederson today. And Phil's got plenty more about this week at ESPN.com, NFL Nation, covering the Eagles at Sheridan Scribe on Twitter. Always a pleasure, Phil. Thanks, bud.
Yep, hang in there, Mike. Take care.